maybe they're grounded in a moment of like, who's doing the work around us? How can we lend to that work? How can we keep our energy and our momentum and our enthusiasm for environmental justice work? And I think all of our fellows demonstrated that so beautifully in your presentations. They were amazing. We're really excited for you all to hopefully continue these relationships and partnerships. And so I wanted to invite some really amazing people in our community to think a little bit more through these connections and to be thinking about the work that they do. And so we have some amazing panelists up here with us. Shreya, like, she's like warming the chair. And so I just wanted to start with, if you all don't mind introducing yourselves, maybe tell us about who you're working with or what you're stewarding, and what brought you here today, besides me asking.
Hi everyone. I'm so happy to see so many lovely faces and such warm energy surrounding our space. I'm Soph. I use they them pronouns. I am a second year majoring in conservation resource studies in English, and I am I don't know if you all recall Laura's beautiful presentation. I'm the Sowing Seeds and Power Ecosystems intern at ALPA. So I work very closely with Dr. Robin at Reimagination Farm and with Asian American organizing and what that means on like a political conscious level, and basically my work there connects Asian American studies to indigenous solidarity and studies, as well as land sovereignty and land-based practices. And I am also working at SERC, which is the Student Environmental Resource Center. Shout out! Love to see other SERC bodies. I work there as the art and storytelling associate, where I primarily sort of try to enliven more of like an oral history and like alternative methods of healing and accessing knowledge and traditions within displaced and like diasporic cultures and voices. So those are my main two ladies.
Hi everyone, I'm Shreya, and I was the previous environmental justice curriculum coordinator for the American Culture Center, and then I worked at SERC for 2 years as the Climate Action Fellow, and that was part of that was creating the Decolonial Environmental Network and starting decolonizing environmentalism decal. And then I graduated last year, and I've been working through the Stronach Prize to start a tea brand with my family, who are 6th-generation tea farmers in India, and we're trying to support regenerative agriculture in that region. So that's a little bit about the work that I was doing, but still very much involved in like environmental justice work through a nonprofit that I run called Project Planet, that's around decolonial climate education. But yeah, really lovely to be in this space. It's so fulfilling because I remember us getting the idea for the Environmental Justice Fellowship just a few months back, and then now it's the symposium to have a whole cohort of fellows, and it's just really special to be in this room with you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Alina Letica Zárate. I'm a second year PhD student in the Energy and Resources group, but I was an undergrad here at UC Berkeley. I also work for SERC. I'm a farm worker and climate justice associate, and have many other positions here on campus, but my work generally revolves around farm worker justice, and the impacts of climate on farm labor. And so I was also a Stronach Prize recipient and just finished publishing my book, Our 5 Seasons, Farm Workers Forming on Climate Change. And continuing to do that work here in my multiple capacities, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all.
Beautiful. Yeah, these are some pretty amazing people. I think we need to give them a hand. And so you've all shared a little bit about kind of the work you're doing. I'm interested in what brought you to this work. What was kind of your entry point? And then I'm also thinking about how do you engage with this work beyond the university and like beyond that framework. I know we think a lot about kind of the cyclical nature of the university is that a lot of organizing and like deeply rooted justice work that happens within it becomes somewhat like incubated, or that you lose a lot of those connections and communities when you graduate. So I'm curious if you all could talk about like what brought you into it, and then either how you are currently or plan to like sustain that outside of the university. You can start.
I feel what really drew me to environmental justice work was my family, and I always heard stories about, the land and how engaging in reciprocity with the land from my family of land tenures back in India. And even though I grew up, oceans away, I feel like that philosophy and that dream of living on the land and living from the land still was passed down to me. And I didn't really know too much about the history or about the details or about what they're going through on the tea farms until a few years back when I visited them for the first time. And I just remember going there and learning from my uncle, who's really into regenerative agriculture, and he's basically one of the only farmers in the region who's still trying to engage within the indigenous practices on agriculture in the region. But it was really cool to see how it is working in a different part of the world. And this was around the same time that I was a facilitator for the Berkeley Student Farms. And it was just all coming together. Like, I feel that my education that I was receiving at Berkeley, I was seeing how it was taking place. The things that I was learning and how it was taking place in action in a completely different part of the world. And it was connected to my family history. And I feel that, when I started digging deeper within that past, I learned about one of my ancestors who bought land back from the British as a form of freedom fighting, as a form of liberation. And I feel like, I never really considered how transforming the economy and transforming local autonomy was part of, liberation, but it's really central to it. I used to always think about, being on the streets or, the things that are associated with that. But learning about my own family history in relation with land decolonization, with abolishing indentured servitude and the impact that it's had on the local community was really powerful for me. And I feel like the stories that I was learning in different classrooms here at Berkeley were just not reflecting the experiences of frontline communities and of grassroots communities. And I feel, especially environmental classrooms, there was just a dissonance with, talking about like the birds and the bees, which is important, but not talking about the human impact, or even if it is talked about, it's like a footnote in the classroom and not central to the content of the class. And that's sort of what led me to create the Decolonizing Environmentalism decal, mostly because I wanted to hear stories of environmental justice that weren't rooted in tragedy, but rooted in possibility about what we can create and what is happening in the local communities. I mean, we always hear about the desolation and about, the impact of pollution, but there is so much resistance and there is so much knowledge that isn't, Western, that isn't going to get attention in the news, but it's something that we need to learn about in order to talk about climate solutions. And in terms of how this work is continuing post-graduation, I'm really grateful for the American Cultures Environmental Justice Initiative, which we started right after I graduated. So it's been really beautiful to see that continue and to see it take its own life within being embedded in Berkeley as an institution, but also reflecting on its relationship with the community and how we can really support all the action that's happening locally. And I, as I was mentioning earlier with my tea bread, I really see that taking shape locally within Assam, India, and then also hope that it takes shape in different communities. And I really see that our position as an institution is to close the resource gap within frontline communities and within the resources that we have at Berkeley. So yeah, that's what I hope to do with Project Planet or with the tea brand, and I hope that it takes different lives.
Wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot there. And I mean, I know I was saying outside of the university, but I think it's so important to uplift that decal you started, we're now developing as a course that's going to be, institutionalizing this knowledge, this care, this intention in a way that like outlasts your time at this university. And so that's super exciting. There has been so much work that has gone into this. And it truly has like started from like a student and a student perspective. And so that also is so important to uplift. So like snaps for that. Let's give Shreya the credit she deserves. And then I also would love if you can tell us about what everyone's drinking. and what's going on there today in alignment with that story.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I totally forgot. But yeah, you should grab some of our tea that's on the table outside. But that's fresh from our family's farms. And then we're having an event later today at 4 to 6 at 575 McCone Hall. It's the top floor. But feel free to come. It's going to be about, regenerative agriculture, about labor rights within the tea industry, and then also just time to mingle and celebrate the end of the semester. So yeah, that's our tea.
Yeah. What about for you two? Like, what brought you into this space, and how are you hoping to continue it beyond these walls?
I can go next. I think that one of the biggest motivators for me that didn't seem fully apparent when I was kind of going into university is my my family history being like a Filipino American and like being part of immigration and diaspora. I think is something that has really stuck with me. I remember when I was younger, a lot of my family members, but specifically my mom, who immigrated here when she was in her 20s, she would tell me stories about like how she was not very like knowledgeable about recycling and like how we're able to like kind of navigate like disposing waste and how we're doing that, because she would tell me that in the Philippines like it was very normal to just burn plastic, and that most of it's all about like reusing there, but like if there's trash, then you just burn it, which is just completely like terrible and something that's a huge issue like in the global south. And I think like being someone who's very privileged in the fact that we're able to go to academic institutions is something that I've been like kind of like grappling with a lot, because in my classes, I started out as just a conservation resource studies major, taking like the general requirement classes. There's a big kind of like underlying extraction that goes on when we're thinking about like taxonomical classifications, how we're making these scientific discoveries that isn't fully addressed. Like there's so much that needs to be going on besides like a land acknowledgement, besides like stating that there are these plants that are from like this specific like traditional culture, but like we're not telling the story of like how we may have like been, how like white settler scientists and colonists like may have like extracted from that. And I think that's been something I've been dealing with a lot, like being in an academic institution. And I think that like when I was able to have the privilege of going back to my motherland, like after COVID, because prior to that I was raised there, like I would go there every summer for like months on end. It was just really eye-opening again to see how different of a world it is when you go back to the motherland. And shout out mothers, happy early Mother's Day. And I think that like being in the space of like your home heritage and like being in the space of the Philippines really like opened up my eyes as well, like, to the fact that there's statistically over 75% of the Filipino population are still peasant farmers who are dealing with feudalism, and it's something that is a huge like environmental justice issue. And it's something that's super dear to my heart, because a lot of these folks, they're just like working with making like less than $2 like a day. And it's just absolutely crazy to me like how different of a world like we're living in now. And like I feel the generational like weight and trauma of that, like when I think about this and like thinking about land sovereignty, something that's been really special to me, and like something that I've been like kind of navigating in this like academic institution. How are we able to amplify stories of indigeneity, and like how are we able to kind of like combat like settler colonialism and US imperialism, especially like thinking about the global south and the Philippines. And I feel like for me it's really important to tie in cultural heritage as well, like, to like academic learning. I think that like I wouldn't have been able to be the person that I am without learning like through education. But education can be like two different things. Like I've learned so much from my family and from like oral history and storytelling versus like in the classroom, and how can we kind of like bridge those two together in a way that is decolonial and amplifying like stories and voices of color. Is something that has been very moving to me, like in the environmental justice movement, is how are we able to access or create greater access to these knowledges of like, cultures who have been like intentionally suppressed from the archives and from like everyday lives.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I think I grew up in San Gabriel in LA, and I was always just very aware of the fact that we live in a drought and kind of the environmental conditions. But the connection to environmental justice really happened when I had the privilege of going to Palestine and being in the West Bank and spending time in a refugee camp. It was the first time where I really saw the connection between what people were struggling with and the landscape. So to be in a place where people don't have water, where they're living in what used to be temporary and have now become permanent structures because of this continued displacement, and to live under an apartheid structure. And so for me, I walked away from that experience really transformed. It transformed the way that I engage here in the United States, that I engage with the landscape, and it made me obsessive about kind of the environmental issues that we face. And from that experience, fast forward 4 years, I chose to take a gap year before coming to college, and I went to work for the United Farm Workers of America and was spending time in the Central Valley with farm workers, and I saw the exact same thing. I saw people who cannot drink their water, who are living under these oppressive social but also environmental structures, that are living in trailers and temporary homes, and that are living under this constructed illegality. And kind of the consequences of having to navigate that. And so for me, I walked away from those two experiences, not wanting to be a policymaker, not wanting to become a lawyer, but wanting to be an environmental scientist, because I recognize that in order to help these people and to dignify their lives, we have to help the landscape and dignify the landscape. And so that is what my work has been dedicated to since then, of developing the skills and engaging directly with community and trying to uplift their knowledge and their experiences of engaging with these landscapes. And so, for me, I see the university as a tool. I am here to use the university in order to advocate and support the communities that I am a part of, that I serve. And so for me, my work, as hard as it can be in this environment sometimes, is always informed by the community. I'm always going back, and I'm always trying to learn from them first, and to humble myself as much as possible, to then advocate for their perspectives and their ideas and their needs in this space. So I think I am truly here because I believe that this project is important, that understanding farm workers and advocating for farm workers is something that we should all be doing because we are all connected to them, and that will truly make our lives better if we can make the world better for them. And so I'm here to complete that project, not necessarily, for whatever career or thing that I'm moving towards. For me, it's just a privilege to be able to be in this space and to uplift them and to remind people about what our farm workers are experiencing, because ultimately we are connected to them, and we cannot live truly dignified and healthy lives if farm workers are not dignified and able to live healthy and safe lives themselves. So that's kind of how I center myself in this space and in this work.
And do you want to talk a little bit more about your book and where folks can support you with that?
I always forget. Yeah, so the book that I recently published was this radical attempt to try to see okay, what if we considered that farm workers were climate experts? What if we truly believed that their knowledge was valuable and that it can speak to kind of these larger conversations that we're having about the climate crisis? And so the book is titled Our 5 Seasons, Farm Workers' Warning on Climate Change. It's available everywhere. It's on Amazon, but also any of the local bookstores here in Berkeley. I think Mrs. Dalloway's is the one that's carrying it primarily. But the goal was to really just center their voices and trust that their direct words were something that are of value and could engage everyone in these topics. So it's a collection of testimonies that were minimally edited, really just translated, and are organized into the 5 seasons of farm labor, which is cold, heat, storms, fires, and pesticides. And the idea is, one, to help all of us reframe our understanding of the challenges of the climate crisis in agriculture, but also to empower everybody to recognize the the embodied knowledge that we all hold. You know, the things that the farm workers are observing and are uplifting are things that I have experienced in my own life, but kind of disregarded because I didn't think it was important, or I didn't think that it was my place to speak about these things. And so the goal is really like to encourage everybody to engage more intentionally with our food system, and to join kind of this collective and really diverse struggle of trying to make our food system better and work better for all of us.
Yeah. So I'm hearing some really important threads from you all that are also like scaling up and looking transnationally at like the importance of a multicultural and pan-ethnic like solidarity project around lands and around labor. I'm thinking about like Alina, what you're sharing about, you know, seeing the connections between Palestine and farm workers in the US and California, and how that's like related to a lot of the conversations we've already had around food sovereignty and like who gets to have autonomy over their lands. Shreya, I'm like thinking about your story of like learning about rematriation in your family history and how powerful that is, and how like that's knowledge that's been lost, and like tracing ourselves alongside where land has been severed. And so like your story about oral histories and like putting yourself and like your own identity into this wider context around like who's allowed in an archive and how archives are formed, and how like, you know, just earlier today we were thinking about like how do we store and publicize and share oral histories. Like these are really important threads to me. And I want to ground us that like today is May Day. Happy May Day, everyone. And so like labor is definitely on the mind, right? This is like International Workers Day, and like celebrating all the struggles for labor rights and labor justice. And so given that today is May Day, I thought maybe we could talk a little more explicitly about some of the connections between labor issues and environmental justice. And we could think about this locally, we could think about this transnationally, but have you found that solidarity efforts really lend to the intersection of these two issues? And maybe how you see your own work grounded in labor?
To start, I feel like there's no talking about climate change without talking about labor justice, or talking about poverty, or talking about, you know, all these structures that I feel like are intentionally separated from the topic of climate change. And specifically to labor, I mean, labor is so prevalent, it's the entire backbone of the tea industry. And even by design, when we look at history, the reason why it's so labor intensive is because, you know, you have to pluck each individual leaf by hand. It's not just hand plucked, it's hand picked. So you need a human being to understand which leaf to pluck and which leaf to not. And unfortunately, you know, this understanding of tea and the way that it's cultivated was exploited by the British, and they created a system of indentured servitude in order to manufacture large quantities of tea and then export them to different countries globally. And so this is specific to tea, but that's the same story in like bananas or in palm oil, or in, you know, even when we're talking about luxury developments or cobalt or diamonds. And it's the same thread of exploiting not just the land, but also the people tending to the land. And how do we sever this bond and exploit it and make it difficult for them to even, you know, be on the land? It's traumatic to be forced into this system of servitude or slavery, or modern day slavery that still exists, right? We see slavery as something of the past, but there are those systems that exist in different ways today, in different industries today. And so when we're here on the other side of the global supply chain, that, you know, we're saying there's this desk and we don't know where this desk is coming from. We're drinking tea and we do know where the tea is coming from. But, you know, we have all these products that we use and treat as second nature. And that is the entire backbone of the supply chain, but also the backbone of the climate crisis, when there were colonizers who traveled to different parts of the world in order to get spices, to get gold, to get bananas and sugar and coffee and tea. And that story has been completely eliminated from talking about climate. And we drink our tea and we, you know, drink our, you know, whatever, like our coffee and eat our bananas, but we're not talking about where it's coming from, who's growing the bananas, who's tending them, what systems of unfreedom have created this entire global structure of the climate crisis. So I feel, coming back to your question, if we're not talking about labor rights, we're not centering the climate crisis at all, and we're not going to solve it because there's a lot of layers when dealing with solutions, and how do we even, grapple with it. Like, for example, within the tea industry, whoever is working on the fields, like, it's really difficult. And I mean, of course, but also there's no future in it. Like, we have different schools within the different tea plantations in order for people to, move out of the farms and into the cities, because they're not making any money. And it's just really difficult to think about an industry that is constantly evolving and constantly shifting. But what happens when the workforce that is dependent on this industry doesn't have that industry anymore? And so it's easy for the tea industry to go to another state in India to exploit when Assam fails, or to go to another country like Nepal when India fails. But ultimately, there is millions of people who are dependent on that industry. And I feel that within, for not just the brand, but in general within the work that I'm trying to get involved with, I hope that there is room for a sustainable transition that takes into account all lives, and not just the folks at the end of the global supply chain. And that starts with tea. It goes to cobalt, it goes to energy, it goes to every aspect of the climate crisis. And so, like, May Day is, in my opinion, central to climate action and activism.
I can go next. Thank you, Shreya, for such beautiful words. I also wanted to share a text that I've found super inspiring in navigating all of these sort of like very difficult and very like traumatic experiences across all generations. It's called How to Eat by Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh is a very profound Buddhist figure and speaker, and in that book, in that text, he kind of navigates how can we, as people who benefit from the system, who benefit from, who are living like in the U.S., like how can we kind of navigate eating the food that we have at this table, like eating the food in front of us, and thinking about all of the violence and all of the sacrifice and all of the blood and everything that is taken to get the food to our table. Like, who are the workers? Who are the land? Like, where is the land? Like, where are there pesticides involved? Like, how are we growing the food? How long did it take for the food to grow? And like, what is the cycle on that? How is climate change impacting that? And it really kind of recenters, for me at least, like how I see food, and how I see like, not just how can we nourish ourselves, but how can we nourish like our whole communities and the world. And I think like one big aspect of my identity is I'm pescatarian, and I'm working towards becoming plant-based, but it's just been very difficult in kind of like staying connected with my culture, because like Filipinos, we love our meat. But I really do think that it goes not just, like an issue of the laborers, but also like how can capitalism extract our world and like non-humans even further, right? Like, we're thinking about like what has previously been indigenous sort of practices in tending to like cultivation of not just like land but also animals, and how has like white settlers capitalism kind of morphed those structures and this culture like into a system where we're kind of like pumping both animals and land with with pesticides, with all of these terrible things, and like generating CAFOs where it's just like super unethical and just super unnourishing for land and for things for us to consume. And I think that's something that's like also deeply like in my heart as well. And just thinking about like how much labor impacts like food and like the environmental justice movement is like it's so important, especially like thinking about like where not just are our food coming from, but where do we come from, and who, like, we are part of like the earth, and like everything that we consume will eventually go back into the earth when we all pass, and what's our lasting impact that we're going to be leaving on each other. And I think like in speaking to the solidarity issue, I think the best ways that I try to practice that is, going to your farmers markets and going and connecting with farmers and like seeing their stories, seeing how much, like their families and their circles have inputted into that, and like seeing those people as human, and like seeing their food as like just beautiful gifts and products like that we're able to kind of like receive, and like how can we kind of give back. Robin Wall Kimmerer also is an amazing author and amazing scholar, and she in one of her books, The Service Fairy, she talks about the gift economy, which is something that I think is really beautiful in thinking about labor, is how can we heal from these like extractive structures, and how can we really cultivate a gift economy. It shouldn't just be about giving money and like taking things away from our earth and away from the people who cultivate the land, but it's really like how can we be in community with each other, and how can like the gift of like a strawberry really, like how can we give back to that, whether that's like also helping out with the land, whether that's gifting them back like a sourdough bread, or just passing it on to the next person. I think are amazing ways that we can kind of cultivate community care and healing, which is so important like to the system that we're all kind of like stuck in. It's really important to acknowledge like all of like the trauma and all of the terrible violence that has been going on, but it's also just as important to recognize that we can heal from this, and we are all like in this system together and in this community, that we can all like care for each other.
Yeah, I'll just second everything that Shreya and Soph said. I think for me, like becoming a graduate student and entering the space where really all I think about is labor and the environment. Like it is the basis of everything that I'm interested in. And I've been really shocked by how far behind in general the conversation is, that we don't tend to think about labor first when we think about the environment, and that when we do, we tend to think about it in like terms of like, well, if we have a transition, then how many jobs are going to be created, how many are going to be lost? But there's not a lot of consideration of like, what's the impact on jobs now? And are the jobs that we're creating or losing or that we still have, are they dignified jobs, right? Are they jobs where people can live with dignity, that they can meet their basic needs? And we really aren't thinking about those things at all. And so for me, like farm workers are these canaries. They are the example of what our system looks like right now. If farm workers are experiencing pesticide poisoning, then the food that we are eating is also experiencing that. If they are dying in the fields because of heat, our crops are also burning on the vines because of these huge climate changes that we're experiencing, but we're not thinking about those connections. And I even think about it, even though I study farm labor, like thinking about it beyond just our food, of like, how long does it take you to commute to wherever you're working or wherever you're studying? Like, how many hours do I spend like on my computer attached to energy, because this is the way that academic labor is structured? And like, I don't feel that that's a dignified life, but it can be hard to escape from it. And so for me, my hope is just that like, with this kind of, feedback loop where the more that we destroy the environment, the more that we are destroying ourselves, or the more unhealthy that our labor is, the more unhealthy our environments are, that there's a potential to reverse that. That if we really work to make our environments healthier, that our labor will become healthier and vice versa. And that is what we should be working towards, and something that we should be considering a lot more when we talk about these things, because climate change is in itself a hazard, but it's also an exacerbating force. It's going to reinforce these kind of harms that we are experiencing. And so I think, always keeping those two things present and really trying to be intentional about how those things are connected and how they can feed each other is essential to confronting this crisis and to understanding it more completely.
Yeah, thank you guys for all of that. So important. There's an action in Oakland later today, protesting and celebrating May Day. So I just also want to plug that there are things happening today in our community to uplift labor as like fundamental in all of our work. I really just want to end with like one last question, and I think we started at the beginning of the year when we had our celebration in this room, and like we talked about our dreamscapes and what was on the horizon for us. And then Kiyomi led us through that really beautiful meditation at the start of their presentation of like picturing what like this just world is that we want to create. And so I just want to ask you all, like, what is on your horizon? What is giving you energy? What is giving you hope? And I thought that would be kind of how we'll end out this time together today.
I can start. Yeah, thank you for asking that question, really. I feel like that's a really beautiful question, and sometimes when I get really lost a lot in the details of this work, I forget the end goal and what we're fighting for, so I really appreciate that. And I remember recently I was talking to an agroforestry professor in India, and he was saying that, you know, all agroforestry is just a return back into our original practices. So I hope that the future looks a little bit like the past, but also like what we haven't even imagined yet. And there's still, you know, time and room to imagine. And I feel like the definition of modernity is completely encapsulated by Westernization. And I feel like we need more definitions of modernity and how we can reimagine the future. So I hope that the future exists in pluralism, in a return, but also creating new practices, because I do want to recognize that while there are a lot of traditional practices that are incredible, there's also ones that are rooted in inequity, like for example, the caste system in India. And I feel like there is a lot of room to create new systems that are separated from this one path of modernity that is just modeling ourselves after the West. So I'm excited for the possibility of what can become.
We have a specific answer, so I will follow the order. It's a beautiful question, a beautiful way to end out. I try to send back a lot of healing energy out into the world. I feel in my role in like grassroots organizing, I feel is one of kind of like very grounded in healing, and so I love this question. I think one thing that's been really giving me hope is just the community that I'm surrounded by and surrounded with. And the fact that we're all here at this table and in this room is so important. One of my end goals is to become a professor and like kind of navigate how can we decolonize the literary canon and how can we like reimagine these sort of like forms of education to be through a decolonial light, and how can we widen education like to folks that haven't been able to access that. And I think that like the community here and like the fact that we're all kind of like grounded in collective liberation is something that is so amazing to me. And just the fact that like I just wanted to recognize how much of an effort it is to be here and to be in this present moment and to be in this room to occupy this space and time, and that we're able to kind of like take a deep breath in and let go of everything and just be together is something that's just really beautiful. And thank you all for being here, and yeah, I hope you all have a beautiful May Day, and I hope that you give your mom a big hug next time you see her, and you give both like your parents a big hug when you see them, because I think like family, community, and your loved ones is something that is just so hopeful and so like restorative, and yeah, sending warm energy to everyone.
Oh, that is beautiful. I think I feel very similarly. I've been here at UC Berkeley for 7 years, and when I first started, these spaces did not exist and these conversations were not happening, and I felt incredibly isolated, and it's been such a privilege to watch and like contribute to its growth over all of this time. And for me, like I'm just really inspired by all of the people who seem to care and be really invested in trying to create different systems to uplift, you know, folks' knowledge. And so like for me, it's just like I always turn back to the community that I have here, that I have outside of Berkeley, to kind of, you know, even when I'm feeling down or, you know, and things are not going as we had hoped, like I can always turn to these folks and find solidarity in the people that are continuing to trying to make these incremental changes. And then I also think, like, just as a last thing, learning how little effort it takes to make a huge difference. Like for me, like with the book and engaging with the farm worker community, like it took so little effort to like make a huge difference in people's lives. Like just going and genuinely caring about what their experiences are and being willing to listen and learn from them is a huge first step. And so I think that's something that we can all do that doesn't take a lot of time, that doesn't take a lot of effort, but can make a tremendous difference. And I know that the folks here are definitely doing that, and I hope that that continues to spread in all of the communities that we are a part of.
Beautiful. Thank you, all three of you. Thank you for all your work, for your presence here, for your thoughtfulness. I think it's so important for us to hold on to these goals and these horizons that we have. There are so many like liberatory thinkers and academics that always speak on like knowing where you're going is kind of that like thing that guides us. And so I hope we can like speak those to each other more often, that we can think of that as like an accountability and as a trust with one another. And Soph, like you offered us this beautiful moment. I'm wondering if we can all just like take a breath together. Just like, you know, ground yourself, like come back into your body. You've been sitting for a while. Maybe close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And let's just take a deep breath, the deepest breath you've taken all day. Another hand for our panelists, please.